Seven Blue Skies channel presents Paranormal, Book 5, Part 3, Legend of the Living Dead by Dr. Ahmed Khalid Tawfiq. In the cemetery. After our crazy escape, we had reached the cemetery, and the sad moonlight shone on the tombstones, making that dramatic effect that anyone with a rich imagination understands. This suspended moon is a mirror of one's psychological state. When you sit with your beloved, you feel as if a chandelier is hung specially for you, and you remember Romeo and Juliet's words. Then, when you're happy, you feel a smiling face is meant especially for you. But when you go through our bitter situation, the moon only reminds you of werewolves, witches, and the ancient warnings of the moonlight falling upon you as you sleep. It's strange how one thing can contain hope, love, poetry, and horror. But let's leave off from this line of thinking. The time is not appropriate for it because there's a bit of news, which you well know. Yes, that's right. The car was dead. It was 1 a.m. After dozens of Harry's failed attempts, we started to despair. This awesome car could not handle all this effort and gave up. Anyway, this was not the right time for me to mention my opinion about his country's auto industry. "There's no choice but to wait," said Harry. "We're safe here." "And Linda? And Jimmy?" "They won't leave the hotel room," he reassured me. "And the worst that will happen is they'll be really worried for us. But Linda, at least I hope, will think we're just partying somewhere in the city where no one brings his wife." "Partying?" I responded. "Yeah, what a party." Everything seemed to move in the dark, and here a man wearing torn clothes, a straw hat obscuring his face. He moved towards us slowly and confidently until he entered the circle of moonlight. And here Harry stiffened up and shouted, horrified, "Rifat, roll up your window and lock your door." "And why exactly?" I asked. "That guy's hands are totally eaten. He's not alive. He's a zombie." But let's leave off from this crazy situation and how we would escape, and come with me to what's more important. For sitting in a stalled car in the cemetery while a rotten, living corpse approaches you is a normal thing which can happen to anybody. The really strange thing is what happened to Linda in these hours. Afterwards, Linda told us how she was sitting in the hotel room, bored, waiting for us, and little Jimmy had fallen asleep fully clothed some 2 hours before. She told us how she was secretly cursing us, thinking of all the shameful things we must be doing in one of Kingston's cheap bars, when there came a knock at the door. She stood by the door and asked cautiously, "Who is it?" "Open up, Linda. It's me." "Oh," she exclaimed. "Dr. Rifat?" "Yes, it's me." "And don't ask me how," Linda told us, "but that's what I saw when I opened the door. What's important is that, as she said, I eagerly entered the room, and I was wounded in my arm and face. I told her that Harry was in a bind, and she asked to come because he needed her and may not see the light of day. Very persuasive reasoning. And when she asked for an explanation from me, I told her to hurry as time was pressing. So she bundled Jimmy up in a blanket as he whined in protest, and carried him against her chest as he was still drowsy and not prepared to walk. She then locked the room with her key and went down with him. I mean me. And in the hotel lobby she told the receptionist that she may be late, and then went out with me to the dark streets, where dogs barked incessantly. Didn't she notice anything unusual? Yes, she did notice, because Linda is a very smart woman. She noticed that the wounds on my hand and face contained no blood, just lacerations in the flesh, without any trace of torn blood vessels. But what does all this mean? She asked herself. But then she said to herself, I don't have time for these random observations. 6. The Trap of the Living Dead. The zombie neared our car slowly as Harry and I sat stiffly. All of our vital signs had stopped, including digestion, breathing, and thinking. He drew closer to the windshield on my side, and through the glass I saw his face a few centimeters away from mine. He regarded me with curiosity. I won't describe his features so as not to disgust you, but will leave it to your imagination. You've seen Dalmas with me in the cafe, right? Well, I can assure you that Dalmas was really handsome in comparison to this guy. It must be that this living dead state was new to Dalmas. The zombie circled the car slowly, like a general inspecting his troops in the field. and on Harry's side he stopped and gazed at him as he had done with me. He then reached for the door handle and pulled on it several times, trying in vain to open it. And without a word Harry reached behind his seat to the back door, which he had forgotten to lock, and secured it before the zombie could attempt it. 10 minutes passed as that thing circled the car in curiosity, like a wild cat seeing a porcupine for the first time, not knowing from whence to attack. Or like a caveman not knowing how to open a box of sardines, or any other analogy which suits your imagination. Then he seemed to change his mind about the whole thing and moved off, disappearing into the darkness. In victory, Harry exclaimed, "We survived! We survived, kiddo!" "It's a truce, nothing more," I said. "And what makes you think that?" he wondered. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe he thinks the car is a can of tasty corned beef and he has definitely gone looking for an opener, like a hammer to break the glass, or more of his friends to tear the car apart." "What a pessimist," said Harry. And then he exhaled to release the tension and high emotion in his chest. And he asked, "What kind of heinous creatures are these? Like demons. Did you see his face at the window? It'll haunt my dreams for the rest of my life." Rolling down my window for some much-needed air, I replied, "Yeah, I saw. And I realized that this whole thing might not be so scary after all." "What do you mean?" he asked. Lighting a cigarette, I explained. These eaten, wrinkled features resembling a lion, and his missing eye, and his fallen limbs all looked to me like a severe case of tuberculoid leprosy. A case treated with wanton carelessness, without real therapy or care. And in my career, I haven't seen this level of deterioration. Leprosy? Harry stumbled. "I don't understand. I mean, I know leprosy is prevalent in the West Indies. The natives are definitely aware and wouldn't be fooled by it." Blowing out smoke in the dark, I said, "It's just an assumption. The obliviousness of these people and their strange behavior, and the weird gray skin and mysterious atmosphere surrounding this morbid topic, along with the dark and some clever touches, all of this might even fool doctors, and I the first among them. But, as I said, these are just assumptions. I don't believe in something called the living dead, because that's incompatible with religion and science. But, like you, I'm scared and shaken to the core. Something we don't understand is happening here." While fidgeting with the car keys, Harry said, "Anyway, your scientific logic does not deny that someone wants us dead, and that we're in a terrible situation here. And personally, whether it's a bunch of zombies or a bunch of lepers who kill me, it doesn't make much difference." I glanced at my watch. It was 2 a.m. I told Harry, "Our staying here is useless now, because that thing will definitely return with its friends or something to open the car with. Therefore, I think we should try to escape on foot." "That's what I was about to suggest," he said. And we left the cemetery behind and walked between the trees, feeling our way in the moonlight. And we did not forget to take the camera and the recorder with us, and the doll as well. Our shadows moved silently along the road, and there was no sound except for that of a distant wolf exchanging love words with his companion, and the sound of our feet scuffing along the dusty red ground. Jamaica's ground is red and very fertile, although a fair amount of the land is limestone. The seasonal rain started coming down. Suddenly, Harry pointed at a light coming from a thatched hut standing alone between the trees as rain fell on its roof. Finally, shelter. And we ran to the hut, and at the door made of woven straw we found a tool which worked as a knocker. And as we knocked twice at the door, some kind of light, not electric light, seeped through the gaps in the walls. And after a minute we heard a sound as the door opened cautiously, revealing an old woman looking at us in doubt. The light was behind her, so we could not really make out her face. Courteously, Harry bowed slightly and said in French, "Good evening, madam. Our car has broken down, and we wondered if you might be so kind as to allow us shelter from the rain." What's this silly language he's speaking? It's a common method used by those who are not French but speak the language. They think being clever and using complicated verbs makes their French more elegant. Anyway, it seemed like the old woman understood nothing of what he said. Gloatingly, I said to Harry, "Save your amazing linguistic skills. She doesn't understand French." The old woman shook her head and motioned for us to enter the hut. Apparently, it didn't take much smarts to get what we were talking about and what we wanted. And anyway, we don't look like thieves, and there was nothing to steal in this pathetic hut. So, just like that, we entered. The heat inside was even worse than the outdoors. There were hung baskets full of bananas and onions, and dusty, empty bottles, and a primitive kerosene burner on which boiled a filthy pot of some kind of horrible-smelling food. The woman pointed at the floor, so we sat there on top of some dirty rags, secretly hoping she wouldn't feel compelled to serve us dinner. Yet, she actually did pour something for us into 2 rusty old cans and served it to us. And here, something about her hands caught my attention. They were all macerated, some of the flesh hanging off. I raised my eyes to her face and noticed her nose half missing and her gray skin. We had entered and sat in this hut without checking her appearance. What idiots! She's one of them. It seemed like Harry noticed too, because the psychosomatic response had manifested its powers upon us for a few seconds. We both freaked out simultaneously with illogical fear. We didn't ask ourselves, even momentarily, about the harm that this old, frail woman, even if she weren't a living corpse, could cause us. We have to escape. We have to. And before exchanging a single word, we found ourselves running through the rain, to nowhere. Finally, we reached the asphalt. We stood there with our wet hair and soaked clothes, but the weather was hot. Plus, our internal anxiety boiled our blood, so it was impossible for us to catch a cold. Even worse, the rain obscured our vision. And after minutes, we noticed headlights in the distance. We took the position of hitchhikers in an exaggerated way, almost blocking the road with our bodies. A cartoonish scene for no reason. There was no need for it because the driver really did plan to stop. We cautiously moved closer to the car as we expected him to be another zombie. Not to mention, anyone driving at 4 a.m. is worthy of some suspicion. The driver was a handsome young guy. His eyes and feet were intact, and he had a lovely dark complexion. Thus we got into the car, feeling gratitude like never before in our lives. A limitless gratitude for the car, the driver, the destination, and the rains. Everything. "Going to the city?" he asked in excellent French. So I shook my head in agreement. The car started down the road as the rain stopped, but the mud filled the streets now. Everything strange and bleak, as if we were in a nightmare. It seemed to me that my life and personal world in Egypt were so distant now. Even the hotel and Linda and Jimmy and Gabriel, all were things from the dream world. I felt this nightmare would never end. It won't end. The young man took out a piece of cloth and started clearing the condensation made by our hot breath on the windshield. And here I turned to Harry, who sat in the back seat. His eyes were fixated on the same thing which had freaked me out. This young man's hand looked like a long, pale claw holding the piece of cloth. What a nightmare! This only happens in nightmares. You escape from something and ask for help from someone, and they slowly turn their head to you, and you realize it. No, let's escape, Harry. We were both on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and it seemed to us that we would scream with horror until we died. And here the kid glanced at me and noticed me looking at his hand, so he said with some embarrassment, "I'm sorry, excuse me," and he brought down his hand from the windshield, mumbling, "My hand is a prosthetic. Anyone seeing it for the first time has the same reaction. See, I lost my hand in an accident 2 years ago." And he lifted his arm and started opening and closing the hand in a mechanical way, saying, "I got this hand in San Francisco last year, and it does a good job, but I don't deny that it's kind of scary looking." I exchanged looks with Harry, and we sighed in relief. We had really hurt this young man's feelings, but if he knew what we had been through this horrible night, he wouldn't have blamed us. Anyway, we grew less cautious, telling him the events of the evening. And to me, he seemed understanding and empathetic. He advised us to leave Jamaica as soon as we could, because the voodoo witches don't joke around. As we entered the empty streets of Kingston, I asked him, "Are there leper colonies near this town?" Smiling, he replied, "Yes, there is one, but the zombies are not lepers, if that's what you mean. We Jamaicans know all about leprosy, and we wouldn't misdiagnose the illness. And anyway," he went on, "I haven't seen a zombie in my life." "What a lucky guy," I said. As for me, I spend 2 days in Jamaica and find all the zombies on the island pursuing me. I go to Romania for a week or two and find myself threatened by a werewolf. And I spend 1 day in Scotland and almost meet my demise between the fangs of the Loch Ness Monster. All this while some locals here have never even seen a zombie. I'm a weird person. No, really, I'm so weird. The light of dawn was invading the city as we entered the San Ramon Hotel, wasted, broken in body and nerves, fatigue and lack of sleep making us loopy. And in the lobby, housekeeping had started their daily work, and the receptionist was red-eyed from staying up all night. When he saw us entering, he yawned while handing me the room key and asked, "Isn't the lady going to stay tonight?" "Which lady?" "The American lady and her kid," he said. "Didn't she go out with you at midnight?" "You were wounded then, sir, and it's a miracle how you healed within just 6 hours." 7. Give my wife back. Detective Marcel sat in his office looking surprised. He had opened his shirt collar and loosened his tie, needing some air in this humid noon weather. And on his desk were 2 glasses of lemonade, the condensation obvious on the glass, the 4th cup he drank today. And he wanted nothing more from the world but to be left alone until the night fell, bringing its merciful breeze. But Harry had no intention of leaving anyone alone today. His beard had grown a bit. His hair was disheveled, as were his clothes. And he was obviously rabid and would blow up in anger at any moment, and at any miserable person who tries to provoke him or ask him to be reasonable. The detective was saying calmly as he sat with his hands on his desk, "And now, let me hear this story one more time." Just as I had feared, Harry shouted, "I already told you. Those zombies kidnapped my wife and son." "And you also say that your Egyptian friend here is the one who kidnapped her. But it's impossible for that to have happened because he was with you in the cemetery. Isn't that correct?" "Okay, look, you're not making sense." "Well, then who would understand?" Harry raged. "Calm down, please, sir." "Listen to me, officer," Harry demanded. "I want to speak to my country's consulate." I smiled secretly, remembering our conversation about linguistic security that night, and how Harry said that the sentence, "I want my consulate," is the most important sentence when learning any foreign language. And Harry was right, and how I wished he wasn't. But, of course, I would not dare speak these thoughts out loud because the situation was inappropriate, and I think you would agree. Sipping his lemonade, the detective/imbecile cut to the chase. "Usually we don't consider someone really missing until 24 hours have passed from the time of their disappearance. Thus, I don't see your wife's disappearance for 12 hours as something to worry about." Unable to listen politely any longer, Harry shouted, "Not something to worry about? When a woman and her child leave a hotel in the middle of the night, alone, on this wretched island overrun with thieves and charlatans and hustlers, I don't know about you, but that boils my blood. So tell me, when exactly would you start worrying? When you find their bodies?" "Well done, Harry. I have no wife or children, but I would have said the same thing if I were in his shoes. I love the kind of man who turns into a beast when his family is in danger." But all this barking was not affecting the detective. "I've explained the law to you," he said, "and the procedures. And anyway, the first thing we'll do is interrogate this friend of yours, as he's the last one who saw her and the one with whom she left." Harry lost all control over his nerves, shouting, "Are you kidding me? I'm telling you, he was with me." The conversation had reached the boiling point, such that I thought one of them would kill the other. Thus I grabbed Harry's arm, directing a quick thank you to the officer, and pulled him, Harry, not the officer, outside as he continued to shout and rage, using all kinds of American swear words I had never heard in my life. We returned to the hotel and sat in my room discussing the best solution for this nightmare. Harry believed time was not on our side. But why? "Because the fortune-teller told you," said Harry, "that 2 foreigners would die like dogs. And I guess it's apparent now that me and you are not the 2 foreigners. Plus," he continued, "she said this would happen after 2. If that means 2 days, then we have to save Linda and Jimmy by midnight." I considered. "She chose me and you particularly for the honor of being buried alive." "Then we're all going to die," Harry said miserably. They die like dogs, and you and I get buried alive." I shook my head dismissively, and I translated for him the Quranic verse, "Fortune tellers are liars, even if they do tell some truth at times." Pacing the room like a caged lion, he speculated, "Maybe the fortune teller wasn't exactly telling your fortune, meaning she knew those people's intentions and warned us in the form of a prophecy. And that assumption makes what she said, despite its being mysterious, worthy of contemplation." He then turned to me, insistent, saying, "Anyway, I think the key to this mystery is with her, and we have to visit her now." "I agree," I said, though I'm not keen on repeating the experience, and just then we heard a sound at the door, and I noticed something, an envelope, sliding underneath it, and speedy footsteps running away. I ran to the door in a hurry, though I knew some such melodramatic movement never works, for the story always ends with not finding anyone at the door, and the receptionist would look at you stupidly if you asked if any suspicious person passed by. And that's exactly what happened. I returned to the room to find Harry holding the letter, his face distorted by its contents. He handed me the paper, on which I found bizarre symbols. The edges of the paper were burnt, giving it a certain authenticity, and there were ancient drawings of skeletons, and then a message written in capital English letters: "The camera and the machine, at the Demon's Tree at sunset." Turning the paper between my hands, I said to Harry, "So it's like that, without any kind of threat?" Wearily, he explained, "It's a certain literary technique, keeping it short and sweet and not mentioning the already obvious facts, because he knows that we know he's going to bargain with Linda and Jimmy. Plus, he knows we're expecting a ransom note. I guess that's why he's saving ink and paper." "But how can we know he's the kidnapper?" I wondered. "Who else can force us to do anything?" he said. I contemplated the note for a second and then said, "Well, the writer of this note is very stupid." "Why do you say that?" asked Harry. "Notice how he says the camera and the machine. Of course he means the recorder. And it would have been better to ask us for the film and the tape. I mean, that's what they really want. For how would they know if the current film and the camera is the one they want? And how would they know the recording was the tape we recorded last night? It's as if he only wants the camera and recorder because they're expensive, like a common thief. Your average thief doesn't leave ransom notes with magical drawings on them. He just said it wrong, but we know what he means. And another thing," I went on, "he obviously isn't used to writing in English." I then scratched my head in confusion and continued, "And when did these losers see you holding the camera and recorder? You ran to the car before they saw me, so it's impossible they could have seen what you were carrying. How can they ask for something they don't even know exists?" Impatiently, Harry said, "I don't know the answer to all your silly questions, but I know these witches have an uncanny way of knowing things. And by the way, stop playing Mr. Cop and don't even think about implying that this is all a complicated conspiracy I thought up to get rid of my wife, which almost succeeded but for this momentary lapse." "I swear," I told him sincerely, "the thought never crossed my mind. I was actually thinking they had a spy who saw you escape with the camera and recorder. Or saw you coming back with them." He narrowed his eyes as he said, "Like the receptionist, or Gabriel from room service, or Angela," I suggested, "the florist, without whose advice we could have avoided this whole situation last night." "All three are equally suspicious to me," he said. "Regardless," I said, "we have one definite truth, which is that there is something on the film and the tape that these witches don't want anyone to know. Thus, our first step should be to develop the film, and then go to Gabriel's mother so she can explain to us what's happening." "And do you trust that old woman?" Harry asked. "I mean, her son is a shady character." "Unfortunately," I said, "I don't know any other witches on this island. Do you?" End of Part 3.